Hello, Model Wealth community. It is so good to be with you today. My name is Donovan Sanchez, and it's my pleasure to talk with you a little bit about some inflation silver linings for this quarter's quarterly insight. Now, over the past few years, inflation has really been a serious issue. We've seen many challenges. We've felt it in our wallets. We've seen the challenges that banks have faced. And it's entirely possible that we continue to see some challenges down the road with inflation. Now, that being said, there still are some silver linings in this. And so for our quarterly insight, I'd like to talk about a few of those. Now, before I dive in too much into that, I also would like to spend a few moments here to tell you a little bit about myself. Many of you haven't met me. I'm the newest member of the Model Wealth team, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to work with Randy, Alex, and Anna, and also to get to know you more as time goes on. Now, just a little bit of background on myself. I'm a Bay Area, California native. My family and I have traveled a lot throughout the country, both for work as well as for pleasure, but originally hail from the Bay Area, California. On the professional side, I have a master's degree in advanced financial planning. I'm currently a PhD candidate at Kansas State University in their personal financial planning PhD program. I'm also currently the president of the Financial Planning Association for the 2023 calendar year, following in the footsteps of Alex and Randy. Alex was the previous president, and Randy was the president before that, a number of years before that. I'm also a financial planning faculty at the University of Illinois. I teach there full-time in the financial planning program. And of course, I'm a senior financial planner here at Model Wealth. Now, most importantly to me, I'm a family guy, married to my dream girl, Emily, and together we have 4 kids, and 5 if you include the little pup here. So this is a recent picture that we took a few weeks ago visiting Bryce National Park in southern Utah. Really a fun time there. With that, now what's the takeaway? What's the bottom line that I hope you leave this brief conversation with? Well, it's that you make sure that your cash, now think about things like emergency fund or other cash that's being held in a savings account. Let's make sure that that money is working productively for you, as much as possible for a cash holding at least. So before we get into this though, we need to take a little bit of a wandering back through history. So let's do that together and look at some recent history. Now, in the 2016 timeframe, I was just a young financial advisor getting started. And occasionally someone would come and say, I'd like a high yield savings account, please. Can you get me something that's going to provide me with a decent rate of return? Now, as you can see from these historical savings rates, those returns weren't very attractive. In fact, from 2013 through 2017, we're looking at an average savings rate of just 0.06%. Now, if you're like me, seeing a percentage like that, maybe it doesn't really mean that much. So let's actually do a little bit of math using some time by money. Not too much math, don't worry. I'm not gonna ruin your day for you here. But let's actually look at what a 0.06% interest rate actually gets you. So imagine that you have $100,000 that's sitting in a quote high yield savings account. And let's assume that your interest rate on it is 0.06%. Well, what's that going to give you after a year? What does it grow to? Well, if you held that money in that account and assuming that interest rate stayed constant, your $100,000 would have grown to $100,060. So as you can see, this really isn't a super attractive interest rate. Now, things are changing. In fact, things have changed. But I've found, at least in conversations with the clients that I serve, that many of us aren't really taking advantage of the current situation as we might need to or be able to. And the reality is, with just a few adjustments, we might be able to see significant increases in the amount of return that we can get on money that's being held in cash in a savings account. Right? We want to be safe with this. If we have an emergency fund, we don't really want to take risk. So what adjustments can we make? More on that in a little bit. But again, the reason why things are changing is because of inflation. Inflation poses challenges, but again, I would contend there's at least a few silver linings here. But let's look at the backdrop of inflation. Where are we? Where have we come? Right? Inflation in 2020, just before COVID, was just 1.4%, right? With COVID happening in the 2020 calendar year, we saw stimulus, we saw increased spending as people had more money in their pockets. They were wondering what to do. They were at home, online, and they're saying, hey, here's some things I'd like to do, here's some things I would like to buy. And we've seen inflation really start to become an issue. In 2021, it was 7% over the course of the year. In 2022, it was 6.5%, so really not much better. Now, fortunately, we have seen inflation start to come down over time, and largely that has been a result of the Federal Reserve increasing interest rates. And we'll get to that in just a moment, why the Fed is doing that. But inflation has some serious effects. Consider this example here. Let's imagine an individual has a salary in 2020 of $150,000, right? A good salary there. To get the same buying power today in 2023, they would need more than $177,000. We're seeing a $27,000 increase today just to buy the same amount of goods and services that they could have bought during the 2020 calendar year. Right? So this is the challenge with inflation, why people are so concerned, why perhaps you've been concerned, why the Federal Reserve is concerned. We don't want to see inflation continuing at this rate for a really long time frame. Okay, so what does the Fed want to do? Well, primarily they want to bring inflation under control, but they would like to do that in a way, they've called this a soft landing. Can we have a soft landing where we bring down inflation while also averting a recession, right? This is the grumblings and mumblings that you're probably aware of as you've listened to the news media is, okay, can the Federal Reserve raise interest rates so we bring down inflation, right? But also avoid us going into a recession where we could see job losses and other things like that. So as a means of curbing spending and incentivizing saving, the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, right? Interest rates make it more expensive for us to go out and borrow. So we're not borrowing as much, businesses may not be expanding as much, and this helps reduce the rate that the economy is going on, right? It helps reduce inflation over time. That's the idea. Now, of course, there's downsides to inflation, higher cost of living. We're all feeling that, right? Going to the grocery store, it's amazing how expensive our food is, at least in comparison to not long ago. As I've mentioned, it's more expensive to borrow. Here's some data for you. In January 2021, the average 30-year fixed mortgage was just 2.65%. In July of 2023, that average 30-year fixed rate mortgage is 6.96%, so more than doubling. And of course, another downside of inflation is the risk, right? Having a recession, and as a result, the Federal Reserve increasing those interest rates, right? The Federal Reserve is trying to avoid that. So with all of this, all right, hopefully I haven't generated too much discomfort for you. Hopefully you're still with me. I do think that there is a silver lining, even with all of the challenges that we faced over the past few years, which they've been really, really serious challenges. But as the Federal Reserve has been increasing interest rates, those interest rates trickle down to your savings accounts, right? Or at least they can. So let's look at this again. We're looking back at this chart, but I've added another line here, right? Someone who says today, hey, I'd like a high yield savings account. Well, actually today, there are attractive rates for high yield savings accounts where you can park your monies that would still have FDIC coverage, right? Alex talked about that in the last quarterly video. Check that out if you haven't had a chance. But today, right, we're looking at these historical averages here that were quite low. From 2017 or 2009 through 2017. However, in 2022, high yield savings accounts, some of them surpassed 4%. You'll see that it's not really an average here because many banks are still not offering very attractive savings account rates. Now, as of this recording, it's actually possible to obtain a high yield savings account with an interest rate above 5%. Now let's again, bear with me. We're going to go back and do a little bit more math once more, just a little bit. Don't worry, not too much. Similar calculation, we're just going to replace that 0.06%, which was the average up until 2017, to see what a 5% interest rates gets you. So that same, let's imagine again, you have $100,000. It's sitting in a high yield savings account. The current interest rate is 5%. After 1 year, how much does that account grow to? Well, the answer is that it grows to $105,000. That is significantly more than not that long ago in 2017 when we were getting just 0.06%. In fact, it's $4,940 more when the interest rate was just 0.06%. So that's a significant increase. Now, I actually have a personal experience with this. I looked at my local, I bank with a local credit union. And at least previously had all of my emergency fund savings and savings account there. Now, currently, that credit union is offering interest rates of 0.5%. Now, I can't remember if it was exactly that amount when I decided to make the switch, but for all intents and purposes, it currently is 0.5% for balances of $10,000 or more. So let's say that I had $10,000 there. That's only $50. Right? It looks like I jumped back here. That's only $50 in interest for every $10,000 over a 1 year time frame. So I decided to make a switch relatively recently, and I switched to a high yield savings account. Now that savings account is currently earning 4.5% interest. So that's $450 in interest for every $10,000 over a 1 year time frame. The neat thing here is that I still have the same FDIC insurance coverage. I still have the ability to withdraw from that savings account. So for me, for money that's sitting in a savings account that I need for an emergency fund, this is a wonderful switch that earns me a higher interest rate while still maintaining the same benefits that I had with my local credit union where the savings account, emergency fund savings account was previously. Now, this is what I found in working with clients is that many of them haven't taken the time to look, and why would you? Your life is extremely busy. That's okay. But many of the clients that I've worked with hadn't yet looked at their savings account, their bank where they were banking, to see what those interest rates were that they were getting. And more often than not, the interest rates were very similar to like my local credit union where it was a very low interest rate relative to what could be obtained elsewhere. So we'll talk about this in a moment. What can you do about that, right? So let's consider first a little bit about the future. We're not going to gaze into our crystal balls too much because, you know, it's really difficult, impossible, we might say, to predict what's going to happen in the future. There's just too many variables going along. But let's consider, you know, what could happen based on some future scenarios. And let's also consider what you could potentially do about all of this, right? So looking ahead, what about future increases to interest rates? It's currently anticipated that the Fed is going to raise rates at their upcoming meeting later in July. Now, as inflation reaches their target rate, now they are looking at a 2% over the longer run. That's what they'd like to see inflation at. As that starts to happen, they'll probably start to forego increases. Are future decreases possible? Now, in the near term, you know, I think there's a good argument to say that, hey, future decreases are probably not likely. But again, you know, the world is an interesting place and things can happen. If the economy does enter a recession, the Fed may decrease rates as a means of stimulating the economy, right? But what we would expect is that interest rates get raised a little bit more. If inflation comes down to that target, they'll pause. In the future, if the economy needs to be stimulated, they'll start to lower those rates, right? These rates are not fixed, right? They're going to adjust over time as the Fed is trying to navigate how best to pursue its future objectives. So, what can you do? Well, I think the most important thing as a starting point when it comes to our finances, in particular when it comes to investing, but even when it comes to where do we put money, emergency fund money that we want to have in a savings account, is to try to be agnostic about the future. Now, of course, all of us have opinions, but we need to be careful about what we do with those opinions. Sometimes people can get in trouble if they're trying to move around money, in particular from like investments, trying to move in and out of the market, trying to time the market. You might have heard of this concept. However, we need to be humble and really take an agnostic approach to the future, meaning that, here's what we think might happen, but the reality is we don't know. We're not going to be able to predict it. And so because of that, we really should just be focusing on those things that we can control. So controlling what we can control and really leaving, trying to create a solid plan, but recognizing that we're just not going to be able to predict what happens next. So we need to focus on those things that we can control. So as a starting point, after you're done watching this video, go check the savings, the interest rate that you're earning on your money in your savings account. You might be surprised. Now, if you're not and you're earning a good interest rate, that's fantastic. But again, as I've worked with my clients, many have been very surprised to see how low the interest rate is. So that's a first point. Take a look at the interest rate you're earning in your savings account. If you find that interest rate is suboptimal, consider adjusting to an account. Again, you want to keep the same FDIC or SIPC protections, but see if you can get a higher interest rate. Now, you do want to make sure as you're considering different high yield savings accounts, you want to check out for things like, do they have a minimum balance that you need to hold? Are there any withdrawal or other fees? You just want to make sure that this is an account that you will like. Do remember that interest rates are going to fluctuate. They're not going to remain permanently static. But like I was looking for my credit union, that rate is still really, really low. And so switching to a high yield savings account earning 4.5%, that just made a lot of sense. Lastly, I would say this, if you find this process a little bit confusing, if you're wanting a second opinion, you found a high yield savings account you think is a good one, you want to say, hey, take a look at this, we're more than happy to help you explore accounts and other options. So we'd love to be there and help you this. Again, circling back to this bottom line here, right? Inflation has been a real challenge, but maybe there are some silver linings. And I think that it is worthwhile and important to make sure that your cash is working as productively as possible for you, in particular in light of the opportunities and options that are currently available. Again, if you have any questions, any comments, or any feedback, I'd love to hear from you. I haven't had the chance to interact with very many of you yet, so feel free to shoot me a note. My email is right there, donovan.sanchez@modelwealth.com. Thank you so much. Wish you the very best and look forward to being in touch.